She leaped once on their light world, and the aliens screamed, "It has wings!" The message came on a Tuesday. It did not come with trumpets or bright lights in the sky. It did not come with a large ship hovering over a city, casting a shadow over millions of people. It came quietly, as a signal, clean, structured, and unmistakably artificial, picked up by a deep space relay station near the edge of the solar system. The people who received it stared at their screens for a long time. Then they called their supervisors. Their supervisors called their directors. Their directors called their governments. And within 48 hours, every major space agency on Earth knew the same thing. Someone out there had said hello. The signal took 3 weeks to decode. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. A formal, carefully worded invitation addressed to the people of the third planet of the Sol system, which was how they referred to Earth, asking for one representative to travel to a location deep in the outer arm of the galaxy, to attend something called the Galactic Conclave. The message explained that the conclave was a gathering of 17 species from across known space. It had existed for over 400 years. Humanity had been watched, quietly and from a great distance, for the last 60 of those years. The conclave had decided that humans were now ready to be introduced. They used the word introduced the way someone might use it when bringing a small child into a room full of adults. The debate over who to send took almost 2 years. Politicians argued for politicians. Military leaders argued for military leaders. Scientists argued for scientists. Philosophers, historians, linguists, and at least one very loud economist all made their cases. In the end, the decision came down to a joint committee of 12 nations, and after hundreds of hours of interviews, assessments, and reviews, they chose a 34-year-old xenobiologist from Busan named Hana. She was not famous. She had never given a speech at a major conference. She had no political connections and no military background. What she had was a calm, methodical mind. 12 years of fieldwork studying organisms in extreme environments, and a near-perfect score on every psychological evaluation the committee put in front of her. She did not panic under pressure. She did not get angry when things went wrong. She was curious in the way that some people are curious, deeply, naturally, without effort, and she had a habit of watching things carefully before she spoke. The committee also noted, in a private report that was never made public, that she had an unusually low fear response. Not that she felt no fear. She simply processed it differently than most people. Where others froze, she went quiet. Where others ran, she stayed and looked. They thought that might be useful. Hana received the news in her apartment in Seoul, where she had been living for the past 3 years while working at a research institute. A man in a gray suit knocked on her door on a Wednesday evening and told her that her government, along with 11 others, wanted her to be the first human being to make formal contact with an alien civilization. He handed her a folder. She took it, looked at him, and then asked if he wanted tea. He said no. She made it anyway. She read the folder while the kettle boiled. She asked 4 questions, all of them practical. She did not cry. She did not laugh. She sat at her small kitchen table with the folder open in front of her and thought about it quietly for several minutes. Then she said yes. She was allowed to bring 1 support crew member. She chose Do-hun without hesitation. Do-hun was an aerospace engineer from Daegu, 2 years older than Hana, with a thin face and a habit of tapping his fingers on any flat surface when he was thinking. They had worked together on 2 previous research missions, one in the deep ocean trenches near the Philippines, one in the high-altitude deserts of Central Asia. He was not the most talkative person she had ever met, but he was precise, dependable, and very good at understanding how things worked. She trusted him completely, which in her mind made him the only real choice. When she called him and explained the situation, there was a long silence on the other end. Then he said, "Are you serious?" She said yes. Another silence. Then, "Okay, Give me a week to sort my apartment. She gave him 2. The preparation period lasted 18 months. They studied what little information the Conclave had sent about the journey, the location, and what to expect on arrival. They learned about Velun Prime, the homeworld of the Velunari, the species hosting the Conclave that cycle. They studied its atmosphere, which was breathable with the help of a small supplemental filter. They studied its temperature range, which was cold but manageable in standard mission gear. They studied its surface conditions, its light levels, its biology, its basic social customs as described in the translated briefing documents. They studied its gravity last, almost by accident, because it appeared near the bottom of a long technical sheet and did not seem particularly important at the time. Velun Prime had a gravitational pull of approximately 0.18 compared to Earth's standard. Dohun noted it, flagged it in his records, and moved on. Hana read it twice, thought about it briefly, and also moved on. Neither of them truly understood what it meant yet. Not in a practical, physical, real sense. They were engineers and scientists. They understood numbers. What they did not yet understand was what it felt like to carry a lifetime of Earth gravity in your muscles and bones, and then step somewhere that had almost none. That understanding would come later. The day they departed, Yongsoo, the mission director, a stocky man from Incheon who had spent 30 years in the space program and had the permanent look of someone waiting for something to go wrong, stood at the edge of the launch bay and watched the shuttle run its final checks. He had overseen hundreds of missions. He had managed disasters, recoveries, failures, and successes. He was not an emotional man, but as he watched the crew run through their checklist, he felt something he could not quite name. Something between pride and unease. He looked at her for a moment, as if trying to find the right words, and then said simply, "Be careful." She looked back at him, with that calm, steady expression that had become familiar to everyone who worked with her. "I will," she said. He nodded. "And try not to frighten them." She smiled slightly. "I'll do my best." He watched the shuttle until it was gone. Then he went back to his desk, poured himself a coffee, and started preparing for the very long wait that was coming. He had a feeling, deep in the back of his mind, that whatever happened out there was not going to be what anyone expected. He was right. He just had no idea how right he was. She leaped once on their light world, and the alien screamed, "It has wings." The journey took 11 days. The Conclave had sent a ship for them, small, clean, and very quiet. It had no crew in the human sense. It was managed by a system that communicated through a small speaker panel near the front cabin, using a translated version of the Velunari language that had been specifically adjusted for human vocal range. The voice was neutral and unhurried. It answered questions when asked, and otherwise said nothing. Hana spent most of the journey reading. Dohun spent most of it running calculations on his tablet, and occasionally staring out the narrow observation window at stars that no human had ever named. On the 4th day, he said, very quietly, "We are really doing this." Hana looked up from her notes and said, "Yes." Then they both went back to what they were doing. On the 9th day, the ship passed through a region of space that the translated briefing documents called the Pale Corridor, a wide band of diffuse starlight created by the proximity of several aging dwarf stars. The light here was thin and white and constant, with no real source direction. It came from everywhere at once. Through the observation window, it looked like flying through fog made of light. Dohun pressed his hand against the glass and watched it for a long time without saying anything. Everything about it looked delicate, like something that had been made very carefully by hands that were afraid of breaking it. The descent was smooth. When the landing ramp lowered and the hatch opened, the first thing Hana noticed was the light. It was soft and even, coming from the pale dwarf star visible through the thin clouds. Not warm, not harsh, just present. The second thing she noticed was the air, which was thin and carried a faint mineral smell, like cold stone near water. The filter in her breathing unit handled the oxygen balance without any discomfort. The third thing she noticed was that she felt almost nothing beneath her feet. She took one step down the ramp and stopped. It was not that there was no gravity. There was. She could feel the ground, could feel weight and direction. But her body, her muscles, her legs, her spine, everything that had spent 34 years being pressed down by Earth's full pull, suddenly had almost nothing to push against. It was like stepping off a curb and finding that the street was 10 centimeters lower than expected, except the feeling ran through her entire body all at once. She stood very still for a moment. Then she placed her second foot down, carefully, and walked the rest of the ramp. Dohun came down behind her. He took 3 steps and immediately stumbled, not because he fell, but because his legs pushed harder than they needed to, and he bounced slightly forward. He caught himself, steadied, and then stood very carefully, with both feet flat on the ground. "Right," he said. "Move slowly," Hana told him. "I noticed." They had been told to expect a reception party. What met them was a group of 7 Velunari, standing about 20 meters from the landing pad, arranged in a careful half-circle. They were tall, taller than any human, with long, pale limbs that moved slowly and with great deliberateness, the way people move when they are walking on ice. Their faces were narrow, with large eyes that caught light in a way that made them appear faintly luminous. They wore layered garments in soft colors, pale greens, whites, very faint golds, that floated slightly with each movement, as if responding to air currents that Hana couldn't feel. They moved the way everything on this world seemed to be built to move, gently, carefully, as though the ground itself was fragile, and the air might shatter if disturbed too quickly. The one at the center of the group stepped forward. He was slightly taller than the others, with markings along the side of his neck that the briefing documents had said indicated diplomatic rank. The translator device on Hana's collar hummed once, and then his voice came through, adjusted, flattened, made into something approaching human speech, though the rhythm was still strange, like words arranged by someone who had learned language from a textbook. "You are the humans," he said. It was not quite a question. "We are," Hana said. "I am called Tirek in your language. I am the primary diplomatic contact for the conclave during your visit." He paused. "You are smaller than we expected." Dohun opened his mouth. Hana touched his arm once, lightly, and he closed it. "We come in good faith," she said. "We're grateful for the invitation." Tirek studied them both for a moment. His large eyes moved slowly, taking them in from head to foot and back again. There was no hostility in it. It was the same careful, assessing look she might give to an organism she had never encountered before in a field study. Purely observational. "You will be shown to your quarters," he said. "Tomorrow there will be a formal welcome ceremony, and then a tour of the Conclave Forum, before the opening session begins." He paused again. "We ask that you move carefully during your stay. The structures here are precise. They are not built for disruption." "We'll be careful," Hana said. She meant it. She was a careful person by nature. She had spent her career in environments that required precision and patience. She had no intention of disrupting anything. What she did not yet fully understand was that her body had its own intentions. As they followed the Velunari across the landing grounds toward the first of the forum buildings, Hana quietly tested her steps. She walked slowly, deliberately, keeping her movements controlled. But she could feel it with every stride, the way her legs wanted to push, the way her muscles were loaded and ready, trained by decades of fighting a gravitational pull that simply wasn't here anymore. It was like walking while holding back, like every step was the beginning of something she kept choosing not to finish. She looked up at the crystalline towers of the Forum rising ahead of them, their structures thin and transparent, built upward in ways that only made sense in a world where weight was almost nothing. She thought about what Yongsu had said before she left. Try not to frighten them. She kept her steps short and quiet, and pressed her heels down firmly with every stride. She was fine. She was in control. She was the careful one, after all. Tomorrow, she told herself, would be completely uneventful. She leaped once on their light world, and the alien screamed, "It has wings!" The welcome ceremony lasted 2 hours. Hana stood through most of it, listening carefully as Tirek and 3 other senior members of the conclave delivered slow, formal speeches about unity, cooperation, and the importance of cross-species understanding. The translator worked steadily at her collar, converting the layered Velunari language into flat, usable sentences. She nodded when it seemed appropriate. She kept her expression open and attentive. She did not fidget. Dohun stood beside her with his hands clasped behind his back, in the posture he always used when he was trying to look composed while being extremely bored. She noticed this, but said nothing about it. The Forum building itself was extraordinary. It was enormous, wide and tall, with walls made of layered crystal panels that let the pale outside light through in shifting bands. The ceiling was high above them, supported by columns so thin they looked like they should not be able to hold anything up. And yet the whole structure sat perfectly still and silent. Everything inside was built on raised platforms connected by ramps and walkways, all of it light and open, with nothing heavy or solid anywhere. There were no thick walls, no dense materials, no redundant supports. Every part of it was the minimum necessary, no more. It was beautiful. It was also, Dohun thought quietly as he looked around, extremely fragile. After the ceremony came the tour. Tirek led them personally, moving through the Forum at the same deliberate pace as always, pausing at each section to explain its function. The central hall was for open assembly. All 17 species had representation here, and the gallery above it held seating for observers. The East Wing held the translation and records chambers. The West Wing held the diplomatic meeting rooms, each one designed in the environmental conditions preferred by the species using it. They were crossing the main hall toward the East Wing when it happened. The delegation platform was a large, flat structure, circular, about 8 meters across, that hung suspended on a system of thin anchor cables from a point high in the ceiling above the central gallery. It was used for formal address, raised up so that a speaker could be seen by the entire assembly below. At the moment, it was not in use. It was hanging still and quiet, about 4 meters above the floor. The cable system that held it was old, not visibly damaged, not obviously stressed, simply old, in the way that precise things sometimes fail, not with warning, but all at once. The first cable snapped with a sound like a single sharp note. The second went immediately after. The platform tilted. The remaining cables pulled at wrong angles, and the whole structure lurched sideways and began to fall, not straight down, but in a long swinging arc, heavy and fast, directly toward the section of floor where Tirek and 3 members of the Outer Council were standing. Everything happened in less than 2 seconds. The Velunari around them did what every instinct they had trained into them over thousands of years told them to do in the presence of a falling object. They froze. They stepped back, slowly, carefully, because moving fast was dangerous here. Because speed meant bouncing, meant losing your footing, meant making things worse. They called out in their own language. They did what fragile creatures in a low-gravity world had learned to do. They got out of the way carefully and hoped for the best. Hana did not do any of those things. She had already been watching the ceiling, the way she always watched things in new environments. Quietly, constantly, filing information away without consciously meaning to. She had noticed the platform before Tyrek had even pointed it out. She had registered the cables, the suspension angle, the weight distribution. She had not thought about any of this deliberately. It was just how she moved through spaces. When the first cable snapped, her body was already deciding. She took 2 running steps and jumped. On Earth, a full-effort jump from a trained adult in good physical condition might cover 2.5 meters of height at best. It required effort. It required real force. It was work. On Velen Prime, with 0.18 gravity and 34 years of Earth muscle behind her, Hana went up 12 meters in a little over 1 second. She did not plan it. She did not calculate it. Her legs pushed the way they always pushed. Hard, fully. The way a body learns to push when it has spent its whole life fighting a planet that wants to pull it down. And the planet here had almost nothing to pull back with. She passed the level of the gallery. She passed the level of the lower anchor points. She reached the falling platform at the top of her arc, at the exact moment it had swung to the furthest point of its fall, and she hit it with both hands open. The impact was real. The platform was heavy, not impossibly heavy, but heavy, and it had momentum. She felt it in her shoulders, her wrists, her spine. She grunted, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. She pushed against it, redirecting the arc, bleeding off the swing, and then, as she began to fall back down, she twisted and positioned herself so that when the platform came to rest, slower now, angled differently, it settled harmlessly against the base of the nearest column instead of the floor where Tyrek and the council members were standing. She landed. Both feet hit the crystal floor at the same time. The impact cracked it, a series of thin lines spreading outward from each heel, like ice breaking near the edge of a lake. She bent her knees, absorbed the force, and stood up straight. The entire forum was silent. Not quiet, not hushed. Silent. The complete and total absence of sound that only happens when a very large number of people have all stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. Tyrek was standing 2 meters away from where the platform had landed. He was also completely still, with his large pale eyes fixed on Hana in a way that was not the careful, assessing look from yesterday. This was something else. Something older. Then someone in the gallery above screamed. Not a word, not a warning. A raw, genuine sound of pure shock, the kind that doesn't wait for language. And then another voice, and another, layering on top of each other, as the paralysis broke and the entire forum came alive with noise. And out of all the noise, out of all the shouting and crying out, and the rapid Velunari speech pouring through her translator faster than it could process, one phrase came through clearly, repeated by multiple voices, louder than the rest. It has wings. And then again, higher, more urgent. The human has wings. Hana stood in the middle of the cracked floor, her shoulders still aching, her heart rate elevated, and looked around at the chaos unfolding in every direction. She looked down at her arms, then up at the ceiling, 12 meters above her. Then she turned to find Dohun, who was standing near the wall with his tablet clutched to his chest, and an expression on his face that she had never seen before, and could not quite name. He looked at her for a long moment. "You went," he said slowly, "very high." "I know," she said. "They think you flew." "I heard." He looked up at the ceiling, then back at her. "Did you know you were going to go that high?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. Dohun nodded once, the way he nodded when a calculation had produced a result that was technically correct, but deeply inconvenient. Around them, the forum continued to erupt. She leaped once on their light world, and the aliens screamed, "It has wings!" They were separated within minutes, 6 Velinari security personnel, moving as fast as Velinari moved when they were urgent, which was still quite slow by human standards, but carried a clear sense of purpose, came into the main hall and formed a wide circle around Hana and Dohun. They did not touch them. They did not raise anything that looked like a weapon. They simply stood at a careful distance and waited, which Hana understood was their way of containing a situation without provoking it. She did not argue. She stood still and kept her hands visible at her sides. Dohun, beside her, was already trying to talk. "She jumped," he said to the nearest security officer, whose large eyes moved to him slowly. "It was a jump. She used her legs. There are no wings. Look at her back. There's nothing there. She was born on a planet with much stronger gravity than this one, and her muscles are built for that gravity. And here the gravity is so low that when she pushes off the ground, she goes much further than she intended to." And the security officers stared at him. The translator device had done its best, but certain concepts had not come through cleanly. Gravity translated roughly as fall weight, which was a concept the Velunari understood. But much stronger gravity than this had translated into something that apparently meant very little, because every planet they knew of had gravity within a reasonable range of Velun primes. The idea that a species had evolved on a world where the pull was more than 5 times stronger than what they were standing in now was not something their language had a ready framework for. What the translator had communicated most clearly was, she jumped. She used her legs. The security officer looked at Dohun, then at Hana, then very slowly upward at the ceiling 12 meters above, then back at Dohun. "With her legs," the officer said. "Yes." The officer looked at the ceiling again. "No wings," Dohun said. The officer did not look convinced. He looked like someone who had been told that a thing was impossible, while standing directly in front of evidence that it had happened. They were escorted to a wide holding chamber in the south side of the forum, well lit, temperate, with a low bench along one wall, and a small speaker panel near the door. The door was not locked, as far as Hana could tell, but 2 security personnel stood outside it, and she decided that leaving would probably make things worse. She sat on the bench. She reached into the inner pocket of her mission jacket and pulled out a protein bar she had packed from Earth. Dense, slightly too sweet, designed for high-calorie field rations. This was not because she was particularly hungry. It was because she had learned, over many years of difficult field situations, that eating something gave her hands something to do, and helped her think clearly. Dohun paced. He was a pacer. He moved back and forth across the chamber, in short, tight lines, tapping the fingers of his right hand against his thigh in a fast, irregular rhythm. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed. "They think you flew. They've established that. 17 species." He stopped pacing and looked at her. Representatives from 17 species were in that gallery. She finished a bite. "I know. And all of them, I know, Dohun." He started pacing again. "The structural assessment alone is going to be—" He stopped. "You cracked the floor. I noticed. Crystal composite. Load rated for Velinari weight and impact margins. You cracked it. I was falling 12 meters. You cracked their ceremonial floor. I saved 4 people." He paused. "Yes, you did. Yes, that part was good." He resumed pacing. "Everything else is a problem." The speaker panel near the door clicked on. T-Rex's voice came through, translated and steady, though Hana thought she could detect something different in the underlying tone, a tightness, a careful control, like someone speaking very deliberately, because they were not sure what their voice might do otherwise. "I am grateful," he said, "that you acted. The council members are safe. I personally am safe." "I'm glad," Hana said. A pause. "I must also inform you that 3 delegations have formally requested that you be contained for the duration of the summit. 2 delegations have indicated they may withdraw. The assembly is in recess. Do-hun stopped pacing. We want to explain what happened, if you're willing to hear it. Another pause. Longer this time. Yes, I am willing, but I must first manage the assembly. You will remain here, please, until I return. The speaker clicked off. Do-hun sat down on the bench next to Hana. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and breathed in a controlled, deliberate way for a while. 3 delegations, he said. I heard, she said. 2 might leave. I heard that too. This is a diplomatic incident. Yes. He raised his head and looked at her. You jumped 12 meters. I did. Do you understand what you look like to them? They have never seen anything move like that without wings or propulsion of some kind. Nothing on their world moves like that. The biggest land animals here weigh less than 40 kilograms. The entire planet is built around gentle. And you went to the ceiling. Hana was quiet for a moment. She looked at the empty protein bar wrapper in her hand. I didn't plan to go that high, she said. I know you didn't. I just jumped. I know. The same way I'd jump at home. Do-hun looked at her steadily. That, he said, is the part they cannot understand. Back on Earth, it was just past 3 in the morning when the transmission arrived at Mission Control in Incheon. The center ran a skeleton crew at that hour. 2 communications technicians, a systems monitor, and Yong-soo, who had not gone home since the shuttle launched, and was sleeping badly in a chair near his desk. The technician who received the transmission read it twice. Then she walked to Yong-soo's chair, and stood there for a moment, holding the printed sheet, trying to decide how to say it. She decided on the direct approach. Sir. He woke immediately, the way people who have worked long hours in mission control learn to wake. All at once, fully alert. He took the sheet. He read it. He read it again. The transmission was a summary report from Do-hun, sent via the ship's communication relay. It was 4 paragraphs long. The first paragraph described the ceremony. The second described the platform failure and Hana's response. The third described the current diplomatic situation. The fourth said, very simply, Hana is fine. No injuries. Please advise on how to explain Earth gravity to beings who have never needed to think about it before. Yong-soo sat in his chair and read the report one more time. Then, despite everything, despite the diplomatic incident, despite the 3 offended delegations, despite the cracked crystal floor and the chaos in the forum, he felt something start in his chest that he could not stop. It moved up through him and came out as a short, sharp sound. Then, another. And then he was laughing, genuinely, with his hand over his mouth and his shoulders shaking, alone in the mission control room at 3 in the morning. He laughed for almost a full minute. Then he wiped his eyes, straightened in his chair, and started writing the response. He had a lot of explaining to do, and he was going to need a very good diagram. She leaped once on their light world, and the aliens screamed, "It has wings." The diagram took Do-hun 4 hours to build. He worked on it in the holding chamber, using his tablet and a portable projector he had packed in his equipment bag, a small device no bigger than his fist that could throw a clear, sharp image onto any flat surface. Yong-soo's response had arrived by morning, full of carefully worded explanations and reference data, and Do-hun had used it as the foundation. But the translation layer made pure science difficult. Numbers moved through it well enough. Physical concepts were harder. So he did what engineers do when words fail. He made the problem visible. He built a side-by-side comparison. On the left, a model of Earth, size, mass, gravitational pull, and a small animated figure of a human walking, jumping, sitting, standing, each action showing the constant downward force acting on the body at every moment. On the right, a model of Velon Prime, Smaller, lighter, the same actions shown with the gravity value reduced to 0.18 of Earth's. The same figure, the same jump. The result was obvious when you watched it. You didn't need to understand the physics. You just had to watch the little figure go up and see how the number changed everything. He added one more element at the end. A simple line of text, translated into Velinari. Every human alive has been doing this their entire life. They do not notice it because it is all they have ever known. Tirek came to the holding chamber mid-morning with 2 council members and a recording officer. He sat down across from Hana and Dohun with the careful, deliberate posture that seemed to be his natural resting state, and he looked at them both for a moment before speaking. 3 days, he said. That is how long the Assembly has asked for before the summit resumes. I will be honest with you. There is also fear. Hana nodded. I understand. We want to address all of it. Show him, Dohun said. He placed the projector on the bench between them and activated it. The diagram filled the opposite wall. Tirek watched it without speaking. The council members beside him leaned forward slightly. A small movement, but noticeable, as the animated comparison played. Dohun let it run twice. Then he added the voiceover explanation he had prepared, speaking slowly while the translator processed, pointing to each element as he described it. He explained gravity. He explained mass. He explained what it meant to be born on a world that was constantly, firmly, without pause, pulling you down with 5 times more force than this one. He explained what that did to a body over 34 years. He explained what happened when that body was suddenly placed somewhere with almost no resistance. She did not fly, he said. She has no wings. She has no technology assisting her. She simply has muscles that were built for a world that wanted to crush her, and your world does not want to crush anything. He paused the diagram on the image of Hana's jump, the arc, the height, the timing, and then pulled up a second image beside it. A simple graph, Earth gravity on one axis, Velun prime gravity on the other. The jump height calculated for each. On her own world, he said, this jump would reach here. He pointed to a modest mark on the graph. On your world, with the same effort, it reaches here. He moved his finger to a mark nearly 8 times higher. Silence. Tirek studied the graph for a long moment. Then he looked at Hana. You did not know you would go that high, he said. It was not a question this time. No, she said. I knew I felt lighter. I didn't calculate it. I just acted. You acted to save the council members. Yes. The recording officer was writing steadily. One of the council members said something in Velunari that the translator caught as approximately, the force of their world lives inside them. It seemed to be addressed to no one in particular. I would like to share this with the full assembly, Tirek said, indicating the diagram. Please, Dohun said. What followed was 3 days of the most unusual diplomacy in human history. Dohun presented the diagram to the full conclave assembly on the first day. The reaction was not immediate understanding. It was more like a slow realization arriving in waves. The kind of understanding that starts in the mind as information and then travels down into the gut as meaning. Several species requested additional presentations. 2 of the most skeptical delegations asked for independent analysis from their own scientists, who spent the second day running calculations and came back with results that confirmed everything Dohun had said, and visibly unsettled them in the process. By the 3rd day, the 3 delegations that had threatened to withdraw had not withdrawn. They had, in fact, become some of the most attentive presences in the chamber. The fear did not go away. Hana understood that it wouldn't. Not fully, not quickly. Fear of that kind, the deep instinctive kind that comes from watching something move in a way your world says is impossible, doesn't disappear because someone explains it to you. It changes shape. It becomes something that lives alongside understanding, rather than being replaced by it. What she noticed was that the fear had a different quality now. It was not the panicked, screaming fear of the first moments in the forum. It was quieter. The kind of fear that comes with respect. On the evening of the third day, Tirek found her in the small garden outside the diplomatic quarters. A spare, orderly space with low plants that grew in slow spirals, reaching sideways rather than upward. She was sitting on a smooth stone near the path, looking at the plants, moving slowly, watching things the way she always watched things. He approached and stood a few meters away, which she had come to understand was the polite Velunari distance for conversation. "The accord will be signed tomorrow," he said. "I know. I'm glad." There was a long debate, he paused, not about whether to include humanity. Once the assembly understood, truly understood, what your world is, there was very little serious argument against including you. The debate was about where to seat you in the chamber. She looked at him. "Several delegations," he said, carefully, "felt that humans should not be seated near the structural elements." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "That seems reasonable." Something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile. The Velunari face was not built for it in the way a human face was, but something that occupied the same space. A brief, genuine easing. "You saved 4 people," he said, "including me. Whatever fear the assembly carries, that is also known. Both things are true." She nodded. He looked at her for a moment longer. "May I ask you something?" "Yes." "On your world," he said, slowly, carefully, "do all humans carry this force?" She thought about it honestly. About Yongsu, who had spent 30 years in a space program that failed more than it succeeded. About Dohun, who could spend 16 hours on a calculation and then start over without complaint if it came out wrong. About the people who built things and fixed things and carried things and moved through a world that never, not for a single second of their lives, gave them any ease. "Yes," she said, "all of us. We just don't notice it, because it's all we've ever known." Tirek was quiet for a long moment. "That," he said, "may be the most frightening thing you have told me." She almost smiled. "Or the most useful." The accord was signed the next morning. Humanity received its seat at the conclave table. The ceremony was brief, formal, and conducted at a respectful distance from all load-bearing structures. When Hana and Dohun boarded the ship for the journey home, she sent a short transmission to Yongsu. 4 sentences. The accord was signed. Everyone was safe. Dohun had requested hazard pay, which she thought was fair. And 6 other delegations had sent formal messages requesting that a human be present at their next summits. Yongsu read it at his desk in Incheon on a gray Thursday morning, with a cup of cold coffee in his hand, and the early light coming through the window. He read it once. He set down the cup. Then he straightened in his chair, picked up his pen, and began writing the report that would tell the rest of humanity what had just happened. He wrote for a long time, and at the very end, in the section marked Summary, he wrote one line that was not required by the format, but that he felt needed to be there. "We are not the most advanced species in the galaxy. We are not the largest, or the oldest, or the wisest. We are simply the ones who grew up in the heavy place, and it turns out that matters more than anyone, including us, ever understood." He read it back, left it in. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary morning, full of ordinary people doing ordinary things, carrying weight, pushing forward, pressing on against a planet that had been pulling at them since the day they were born. None of them knew what had happened on a pale world 12 light years away. None of them knew that their muscles, their bones, their stubborn, load-bearing, gravity-fed bodies had just earned their species a seat among the stars. They didn't need to know. Not yet. They were already carrying it with them. They always had been.